Howdy my totally as always tubular gamers, and we're back with another ranking video. And today we're going to be doing a bit of a fun one. We're going to be doing the Dead Space series. Yes, Dead Space. A number of people have requested I look at it, and I've wanted to do a ranking on the series for a while, but I was waiting for that new one to come out and see how everything stacks up. Now, if you don't know Dead Space, it is a series of survival horror games released in the PS3 360 era. And now the current era, I guess. Most of them star Isaac Clarke, who has a really bad string of luck and ends up somehow in space fighting these deadly creatures known as necromorphs. When it comes to the gameplay of these games, it's very similar to Resident Evil 4. In fact, RE4 was cited as like a main inspiration. But this feels much more like a spiritual successor thanks to its atmosphere, improvements, etc, etc. Funny enough, when Dead Space initially released, it actually didn't sell all that well. Survival horror was really on the decline in this era, and it was thanks to good word of mouth that the game ended up being a critical hit, a cult hit. It sold millions. We'd end up getting a great second game, an interesting third game, and even a couple spin-offs. However, after that third game, it was clear EA didn't really know what to do with the series anymore, and they said that the third game didn't sell as well as they had hoped, so they shut down the original developer, Visceral Games, in it. And the series went dark for almost 10 years. People wondered, will Dead Space ever come back? But here we are in current year where, yeah, Dead Space has actually come back with a remake of the original game, and that's pretty heartwarming. I think it's great that Dead Space has come back because those original two games have become pretty beloved. People love the gameplay, the atmosphere, the story, the vibes, the sound design, and really just playing it was a mood above all else. And you know, no survival horror game really just hit like how Dead Space did. There were plenty of imitators, the Callisto Protocol, but none of them hit like Dead Space. And so we're going to rank the series worst to best. We're going to be looking at pretty much everything, you know, how have the games aged, how do they play, are they scary, how's the vibes, the atmosphere, the story, all that good stuff. I've been playing Dead Space like well over 10 years. It was one of the first games I got for my PS3. I wanted to get scared, got some good memories with it. This is a pretty beloved series, so let me know your favorite down below. Like, share, comment, sub, all that good stuff. Let's just get right into it. What do I think is the weakest of the Dead Space series? Yeah, it's not even close for me. Dead Space Ignition is easily the worst of the Dead Space series. Co-developed by Visceral Games and Sumo Digital, it was released on Xbox Live Arcade and PSN in 2010. It is an action puzzle game taking place just before Dead Space 2. Now, I remember playing this game many years ago and just going, what is this? And you know, looking back, I'm just kind of baffled this even exists. Like, this is nothing like Dead Space, and I have no idea who they were targeting with this game. Like I said, it's an action puzzle game. You solve puzzles from a top-down perspective. There's like some little mini games in here, and this just feels much more like a phone game. And funny enough, there was a Dead Space phone game, and it was way more involved than this game. Like, the puzzles and gameplay are just really basic. There's also this like choose your own adventure part to it where you just kind of make some choices and you'll get some different cutscenes, and these cutscenes are motion comic style cutscenes, and these just do not look good. They look really cheap, stilted, bland, and it looks like they were made up real fast for, again, a mobile device, not Xbox Live Arcade. And you know, I just don't really know what they were trying to accomplish here. Not only does it play nothing at all like Dead Space, but it's not even a half-decent puzzle game in its own right. Like, this is just boring. They're all underdeveloped, they're just really not cooked, and they're not any fun or engaging in any way. And these cutscenes, I'll just be real, they're just kind of shit. Like, they look so cheap and lame. Like, no, these don't look good. And the story's pretty filler. It doesn't really mean anything. Yeah, it takes place right before Dead Space 2, and it sets up Dead Space 2, the intro with Isaac, and he shows up at the very end of the game, but it really doesn't mean anything. I don't usually tear into a game this hard, but I still just don't know why this game exists. I really don't know why it exists, and it is absolutely not worth playing. And so here we have Dead Space Extraction, co-developed by Visceral Games and Eurocom, releasing initially for the Wii in 2009, but was later re-released in 2011 for the PS3. The game is actually a prequel to the original Dead Space, taking place a year before and showing really what went down on that colony and how the hell the necromorphs showed up and why everybody ended up on the Ishimura, and it really sets the scene for the original Dead Space along with that animated movie. The story is fine enough. Obviously, I don't expect Isaac Clarke to show up here, and that's fine. The characters are nothing really all that special, at least in my opinion, but again, it's fine enough. It does get the job done. It has some good reasoning, and it's cool to see them explain how everything got started before the original Dead Space. Now, the gameplay is decently different from the main Dead Space games. It's not some stupid puzzle minigame, though. It is actually a rail shooter, which is what they thought would be the best for the Wii. An interesting choice, but you know, rail shooters and the Wii actually go together pretty well. I think the Wii has plenty of good rail shooters where you got your Wii remote, you got your nunchuck, you're using the pointer, and you're just blasting stuff. Obviously, if you're playing this game on PS3, you can use the analog sticks, which is pretty terrible, or you can use the PlayStation Move, so you know, if you like those two dildos, you can use those as an option too. I definitely stuck to the Wii version though. I think the Wii version's probably the best. But should you even play this game? Is the gameplay even good? I think this is actually a pretty decent little rail shooter, and I would say that the game is decently underrated. Yeah, a lot of the game you're just absolutely blasting everything, and you know, that's how rail shooters go, but this game has some good Dead Space flair. You're still getting the limbs, you've got your stasis, you've got your Dead Space weapons. There's a number of different weapons in this game actually, and you're really just destroying these things. And you know, just like most rail shooters, you can even get a buddy to join you and you both just blast the necromorphs. Look, obviously this game is not as deep or fulfilling or engaging even as some of the other Dead Space games, but I think that this is a perfectly fine, fun little rail shooter that a lot of people ignore just because it was on the Wii. The game sold like ass. And I really never hear this game talked about, not even in like Dead Space circles, and that's a shame because it's a fun little rail shooter. I would say that it's underrated. After saying that, I've got the game pretty low on my list, so I guess I'm keeping it underrated, but I think that this is a more than competent, fine little rail shooter that probably deserves a re-release. If it was on like PC, I think it would get even a couple people to play it, but hey, if you see it out in the bargain bin or you're just curious and love Dead Space, absolutely check it out. And so here we have Dead Space 3 releasing in 2013, developed by Visceral Games. This would be their last Dead Space game. And for a while, this was the last Dead Space game. People thought the franchise was just done after this game. And over the years, this game has garnered a pretty negative reception. While I obviously think other Dead Space games are better than this game, I still think this game is actually pretty decent. Maybe this is just one of my many hot takes. The game follows Isaac Clarke and his allies exploring this new frozen planet to discover the origins of the necromorphs and how to stop them because they're growing and getting bigger and stronger. The story, I mean, it's fine, I guess, for what it is. I'm sure there's plenty of people that just absolutely hate the story. I remember feeling a bit indifferent, and yeah, the whole we're saving humanity from the necromorphs, it's a bit hand-fisted, and I don't think Dead Space should have really gone down this avenue, but again, it's fine enough. It's not like completely awful, it's not like fan fiction-y bad, but I wouldn't exactly say it's great. You know, the less said about the story, probably the better. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, this is kind of what grinded everyone's gears, including myself. Originally, Dead Space 3 was supposed to be a single-player survival horror experience, the same as the first two, and EA came in and does what EA usually does best, and just kind of ruins it and has all their executives make a bunch of stupid decisions. They wanted an action-oriented third-person shooter with cooperative gameplay and microtransactions with like a horror undertone. See, they saw the success of Resident Evil 5 and I guess like Gears of War and said, yeah, we want that. And I'll just be the first to say that when it comes to the vibe, the atmosphere, and general mood / tone of this game, it is nowhere near as good as the first two games. I do kind of like the vibe this game does have going for it with the snow planet. It reminds me of Lost Planet, and I love Lost Planet, and so I like it there, but yeah, it's just nowhere near as good as the first two games, and I think that turned a lot of people off immediately. The tension, it's just not there, and then you throw in your buddy playing with you because the whole game is cooperative. The other person plays as the new character, John Carver, and yeah, it's just not scary. It's not even close to scary. I don't really think cooperative games are scary. Resident Evil 5 and 6 sure as hell aren't scary. So with that in mind, the game is just totally focused on its action. You're just taking out necromorphs left and right, solving the occasional like puzzle, and just really just going through these very linear areas, blasting everything up. And you know, the cooperative action gameplay, it can be fun. It does have its moments where it is pretty fun, and the combat I think is generally actually engaging. I think the gunplay is good. Fighting these enemies is fun. Like, it was fun in the first two games. It was satisfying in the first two games. They didn't really change much here. They just kind of expanded on it. The game does have microtransactions, and you know, it's funny, 10 years later, we still hate these things, and they're still in our games. They suck then, they suck now. I just wish that they weren't in this game. The microtransactions are pretty awful in this game. It's legit pay to win. Like, if you just want to beat the game and have like no problem beating the game, you can literally buy more resources for like all your weapons, and you can get all the best shit like really quick just by buying it. If you don't though, which I really recommend you don't, I think this game is actually incredibly fun when it comes to upgrading its weapons and the resource and the bench. I think that this is like maybe the best bench in the whole series. I actually really did like the bench. It's like my favorite aspect of this game, and it's the part that they monetized, because of course it was. So yeah, it's pretty clear that Dead Space 3 is a bit of a mixed bag. If you came to this game looking for the next horror game in the horror game series, I might add, obviously you're pretty disappointed and you don't like the game, and I think it fails as a horror game. But as an action game, yeah, I think it's actually pretty fun. It's pretty satisfying. It has a lot of fun weapons to it and a pretty fun progression upgrade system. And you know, just blasting the necromorphs with your buddy and staying away from the microtransactions, I think some fun can be had here. Would I recommend it nowadays? Well, it depends. If you're looking for a horror game, just skip it. But if you're okay with it being an action game, you could do a hell of a lot worse than this game. That's all I could say. And so here we have Dead Space 2 releasing in the golden year that was 2011, developed by Visceral Games. Dead Space 2 is a direct continuation from 1, and they really were looking to improve on a lot of things and still provide that scary experience. The game takes place a number of years after the first Dead Space and still follows Isaac Clarke, who now has all these violent hallucinations and dementia after the first game. And the game takes place on this space station known as the Sprawl. Isaac's here, and it's about him getting the hell out of here because it gets overrun with the necromorphs again. And then there's actually some human antagonists in here as well who want to control the necromorphs. And you know, the story, I think it's pretty decent to good. I don't like the premise as much as the first games, just because the first game I think had such a solid premise, but it's fine enough here. Isaac, I think, is fine. He can talk now, and the hallucinations he has is pretty fucked up. And he's just got some real shit going on with him, and I'll leave it at that. The story, I think, again, it's fine enough. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, they really did try to build on top of the first Dead Space. It is still a survival horror game. It is actually pretty scary at moments. When it comes to the game's atmosphere and vibes and tension and horror, I think it actually does live up to the first game. I think it is pretty solid, and in some ways, it could be even better. There are plenty of people that think it's better than the first games. So when it comes to the gameplay, as in how the game plays when you are playing it, it is very similar to the first game. You're exploring this creepy, crazy space station where all these monsters show up, and it's a third-person shooter. You're managing your inventory. The game still has no real HUD elements, which I still think is just great to this day. And yeah, you're blasting these necromorphs. You got to shoot their limbs off. There's plenty of weapons you get here, some new ones, some familiar ones. Stasis and Kinesis show up here, and they do the same thing that they did before, and the gunplay is just as satisfying as it was in the first game. I think managing your inventory is just as good as it was in the first game, and I think when it comes to the scares, it's pretty similar to the first game, and I'd say it's on a similar level. The game also has the zero-G moments, and these are just as eerie as they were in the first game. Like, these are just really creepy, honestly. I just always thought that the zero-gravity moments in Dead Space were creepy. They're creepy here, and the sound design is just excellent during these. Just really unnerving shit. In fact, this game is relatively unnerving. It has plenty of moments that really are scary as fuck, especially the part with like the eye and the laser, and then there's the quick time events here. Yeah, the game does have quick time events. I'm not huge on these, but they're not too obtrusive. They're like as obtrusive as they were in Resident Evil 4. But they're not the biggest pain in the ass. The campaign is excellently paced. It doesn't go on too long, but it's not too short either, and it's full of engaging moments. In fact, the whole game is engaging, and I remember playing through this game back like really when it came out and just going like, wow, this is really good. And all these years later, oh yeah, Dead Space 2 is still really good. It is aged very well. It doesn't matter if it's 10, 15 years old, the game has aged very well. You know what hasn't aged well though? Is the game's competitive multiplayer that EA for sure shoved down everyone's throat and said that this was going to be the next big multiplayer. I think you even needed an online pass for this game, which just makes me laugh. I remember thinking it was shit then, it shouldn't be in Dead Space, and nowadays I still agree with that statement. It shouldn't be in the game and it sucks. Dead Space 2 though, it's a pretty good one. And so here we have the original Dead Space releasing in 2008, developed by EA Redwood Shores, who would become Visceral Games. Now the original Dead Space, it really just hit different. Like when it came out, a lot of people were really surprised and really happy with this game. Survival horror was really on the decline. There were not many survival horror games, true horror games released around this time, or at least it didn't feel like it. Resident Evil had ditched everything, Silent Hill had ditched everything that made them scary and were much more action-oriented games, but Dead Space came in here and was like, this is going to be scary, and this is going to be bloody, and this is going to be good. And you know what? It was all of those. The game is about Isaac Clarke, an engineer who shows up to fix the Ishimura, this ship that is really big, and for whatever reason no comms are coming out of it, and they're just kind of wondering what the hell's going on. Isaac's girlfriend is there as well, so he's come along just to see what's up, fix their comms. Maybe it's just a short or something, I don't know. And they show up and there's a lot more going wrong here than just the comms not working. Really, it's overrun. It's overrun with these aliens known as the necromorphs, and they're really messed up. Like, these are some scary, crazy aliens, and Isaac eventually is just like, fuck this, I'm getting out of here. I think that the setting, the story, the premise, and the general atmosphere of this game is just superb. It is just fantastic and one of the best for the genre ever. It is incredibly unique. It's interesting, it's different, and it's just really engrossing. Like, I got really into the environment and the atmosphere and just this game's vibes in general. I was really picking up what they were putting down, and again, it just hit different. This game really did hit different. I feel like outside of like Alien, space horror doesn't really exist, but there's Dead Space. Dead Space actually is able to capture what the original Alien did and is able to have a really scary experience. When it comes to the gameplay, it's a third-person shooter. Again, very similar to Resident Evil 4. It's very similar in a number of aspects. You blast a bunch of these ugly necromorphs with a bunch of energy weapons. You can't kill them through conventional, traditional means. You actually have to sever their limbs to stop them, which I still think nowadays is incredibly unique, and going for a headshot doesn't really do anything, which I just think is still great. Like, that is so, like, unconventional and just different, and I don't know why other games haven't attempted this, because it's really different. It makes you play the game differently. It makes you fight the enemies in a different way, and yeah, it requires more combat design, obviously, but I think it really pays off because you have a very unique experience here. And the gunplay is actually really good. It's really satisfying. A lot of these weapons are great, and they really kick some ass. You are also managing your inventory. You don't have a bunch of inventory slots. You can't carry unlimited everything. You do have to manage it across your health items, your ammo, and some upgrades you find along the way. The game was actually really cool with not having a HUD. Everything that you need to know is on Isaac himself. For instance, his health is on his back. The ammunition, like how much ammo you got for each weapon before you got to reload, is on the gun itself. Really, they did everything to immerse you, and I think it absolutely pays off, and the game is aged beautifully, honestly. It is aged incredibly well. It still plays great. It has great pacing to it. It's got a good length to it. It doesn't go on too long, and it's not too short either, and the game scares you plenty of times. There's the zero-G moments, which are just as unnerving all these years later as they were many years ago. There's some other abilities you get here, like stasis and kinesis, and these just add to the game further. The game has plenty of interesting twists and turns, and you'll find yourself really engrossed with this game. Like, I truly do think that it is one of the most engrossing survival horror games of all time. Like, it's just a really good time, and if you're like me, right after you beat this game, you're going to want to play it again. The game has a new game plus, you can carry all your weapons over, and this is a very replayable game, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who have played through this game tons of times, people who have beat it with just the plasma cutter, and you know, it's just one of those games that people love to replay, and there's a reason, because it's still so good. And in my mind, it was pretty hard for any game to top this. I was like, how is any game really going to top the original Dead Space? How do you make a game better than the original Dead Space in the Dead Space series? Well, the only way to have a game it seems better than the original Dead Space is you remake the original Dead Space. I think the best Dead Space game is actually the latest Dead Space, the remake of the original game releasing here in 2023, developed by EA Motive, a studio I've never really heard of, but now they're definitely on my radar because I think the Dead Space remake is fantastic. Not only does it capture everything from the original game that I just talked about, but it somehow makes it even better. The game looks phenomenal. Like, it looks absolutely amazing. It's funny because this is what I imagined the original Dead Space looking like, and then I look back at the original Dead Space and I'm like, oh, this game actually looks like a shit ton better than the original game. This is probably one of the best looking games like ever. The lighting is incredible. The atmosphere has been preserved. It is still amazing. The game is tense. The atmosphere is great. The vibes are good. The mood's there, and I just really enjoyed this game's atmosphere, and it really brought me back. And I think that if this is the first time you've ever played Dead Space as this remake, it's really going to hook you in, and it's going to be just an amazing time. When it comes to the story, it's pretty much the same for the most part. It's about Isaac Clarke and his team of people showing up on the Ishimura, figuring out what's going wrong, and yeah, the necromorphs show up. Isaac can now talk. In the original game, he couldn't actually speak, but they've added him talking here, and I think it actually does add to the game. It's a good improvement. The voice acting's all really good. There's been some tweaks with the story, and I'll just say, I think they were all for the better. I think that the tweaks made to the characters and some of the pacing, I think, is definitely for the better. The game is a little bit longer than the original, but I do think it is a little bit better, and I genuinely really did like the story here. And that ending, oh, that's some good shit. And then when it comes to the gameplay, I mean, the original Dead Space had aged incredibly well, and this, what it does is it just kind of brings it to the modern age. It makes it a bit smoother, a bit easier to play. It's nowhere near as crusty, not that the original game was really all that crusty to begin with, and it still feels great. Blasting the necromorphs, shooting their limbs off, it feels great. The weapons feel really great. The haptic feedback on the PS5 is actually pretty cool here. And I have nothing but good things to say about the combat. I think all the guns feel great. I think fighting the necromorphs is just as good as it was in the original game, if not even better. And then when you're, scavenging around, looking for materials and items and ammunition and doing inventory management, it's still all great. The HUD is, well, really the lack of HUD is still the same. And really, at least in my opinion, the reason that the Dead Space remake is so good is because it's the original Dead Space, which I thought was already like the best Dead Space game, and this game just really brings it into the modern era. It doesn't make a ton of changes or tweaks like other remakes. This isn't the Resident Evil 2 remake where they change hella stuff and the perspective's different. No, it really is that original game brought to the modern day with modern sensibilities, some tweaks here and there, some additions here and there, and it just looks phenomenal. Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure out why this game is good. And the game's not just good, it's fantastic, actually. It is one of the best survival horror games. Actually, no, scratch that. It is one of the best pieces of media in the horror genre as a whole. It is just a superb game. If you're going to play any Dead Space, you're going to play this game. This game actually makes the original Dead Space basically obsolete, which I won't lie, it's pretty impressive because the original Dead Space is great. And the fact that this just really is such a great improvement on the original game, it's amazing. I have zero issues recommending this game, even at its current price. Like, it is still just a fantastic experience. Yeah, it's not the longest. You're not going to get 30 hours of gameplay, but that's not what this game is. That's not what this game ever was going to be. And I have no problem saying that if you're going to play a horror game this year, I really doubt there's going to be one better than this game. Maybe Resident Evil 4, but I really doubt any other horror game is going to be better in 2023. If I'm wrong, it's going to be really fucking good then, because this game is just phenomenal. And that's really it for this video. I mean, let me know down below your favorite Dead Space. Let me know if you played the remake or what you think of everything. If you made it to this part of the video, comment pineapple, as in SpongeBob's house, and then I'll know you're a real one.